musím se omlouvat předem. Budu přepnout do angličtiny. Já si myslím, že pohodlný mého češtiny asi moc jako nehodí. Thank you very much for tuning in. What I'd like to talk about today is global payments trends and the implications for the Czech market. So just some brief background on myself. My name is Erik Howell. I'm a partner with a new consultancy firm called Flagship Advisory Partners, which is a new version of an old firm called First Annapolis Consulting. And in between those two journeys, I was head of transactional banking for Moneta Money Bank here in Prague. So what we do is consultancy for issuers, acquirers, PSPs, fintechs, processors, private equity companies, primarily elsewhere in Europe, but certainly love to do stuff here at home as well. I've been in the payments industry for 20 years, 7 of that in the US, the remainder here in Prague. So if we start the presentation, which I admit I actually cannot see, could we show the presentation, please? So first what I'd like to talk about is just the opportunity for growth of payments in the Czech Republic. So we all know that the amount of payments is huge, growing every year, 15 to 20%, but there's still a lot of room. So if we look, I think, apologies, still not seeing it, but on our first slide we show the relative penetration of card payments versus cash and other forms of payment. In the Czech Republic, cash accounts for about 75% of payments. So there's still a ton of room to grow. Cards are relatively lowly penetrated, especially compared to other Western European countries. If we look at the penetration of POS terminals, also very low. So there's still tons of opportunity for payments to grow here in the Czech Republic. And I apologize because I still can't see the presentation. Could we pull up the PDF, please? Yes, thank you very much. I think one of the big key drivers that we all know is e-commerce and digital. So if we step back and look at the European level, all the growth in the EU is coming from digital channels. So POS growth is growing at about 1%, digital growing 14% on e-com, traditional web browsers, 50% on in-app. So literally all the growth in Europe at the European level is coming from digital channels. And if we look at the Czech Republic, like other countries, it's received a huge boost from COVID. Here we can see on the right-hand side, massive boost of 80% year-on-year increase in digital e-commerce during the first lockdown. Certainly in the second, we would also expect that. When we look at acquisitions, so where are new customers coming from? You know, here in the Czech Republic, it's still mostly from physical channels, branches. If we look at more mature markets like the US, everything is shifting to digital for acquisitions. So on the left-hand side here, we show the number of the percentage breakdown of in-person credit card applications. The US, huge credit card market, definitely massive drop in in-person channels, huge increase in digital channels. What's really interesting is those digital channels are not only direct, which is the tendency here in Europe, but also through third parties. So aggregators, affiliates, very sophisticated digital marketing provides a huge boost in new customer acquisition. If we switch back to Europe, I think one of the key things with this digital challenge is for us, you know, old school cards people, the card, due to a variety of technological reasons, also regulatory reasons, the user experience has just gotten worse compared to other forms of payment. So if you look at non-card forms of payment, so Apple Pay, Ideal, which is a bank-to-bank transfer system in the Netherlands, PayPal, all of these are quite easy. So nowadays, unfortunately, trying to use your card online to pay for things, traditionally a strength, has just gotten very hard, very complicated. And it's not going to get any better with the new SCA requirements. So certainly something issuers and banks need to figure out is how to make the card's user experience better to take advantage of the huge growth in digital channels. You know, certainly there's been a lot of talk about can we use other forms of payment, so P2P, bank transfers, can we create our own domestic network, things like that. There's a ton of opportunities there. I think mainly in Sure. Mainly in the digital channels, because the user experience tends to be just a bit easier. So not having to take the card out, not typing in, 16-digit PIN, it's a lot easier. Of course, creating a new digital scheme is quite difficult. The business case can often not be great. We've seen other countries, domestic markets like Slovenia, Switzerland, try to do their own digital payment scheme, typically using bank transfer technology. What they found is doing it at the point of sale is still really hard. It's just hard to get merchants to accept it. It's hard to roll out all the technology. It's quite expensive. The business case for POS is not great. Business case for digital, much better, primarily because the user experience, the UX, is just a lot better in digital than for physical, and there's where cards have a threat. So there's certainly, about every 10 years, the EU has some initiative to create a European-wide payment system for business and political reasons. This has not worked in the past. Monet, Payfair, others have failed. Now it's the Pepsi, the Pan-EU Payment System Initiative. We'll see how those things go. I think there is opportunities certainly in small markets like the Czech Republic, where you only have a few large players. If those players get together, there is some opportunity to cooperate. At a European level, the business case is just quite tough, but certainly the advent of digital and the huge growth there gives these new forms of payment much bigger openings they would have had 5 years ago. Another factor influencing the EU landscape is consolidation. If we look at other markets like the US, Canada, UK, they went through a big wave of payments consolidation about 10 years ago, creating very big players, and that's happening in Europe as well. So here on this slide, we tracked Nexi, which is an Italian processor, issuer, and acquirer, just how many companies have gone into forming what Nexi would look like after it acquires Nets, which was recently announced. A lot. So there's just creation of these huge European providers, which will have the scale and the reach to compete with some of the bigger US, UK providers. These types of players, Czech Republic is never first on their list. It's always kind of in the second or third tier, but eventually will be on their list, which is probably a good thing for the Czech market to get some new players, but they will increasingly have influence, and that's definitely something we would encourage Czech issuers, acquirers, PSPs to consider how these new types of players will impact your market. Fintechs, there's a lot of talk about fintechs, rightly so. There's some huge success stories. If we look at Stripe, Adyen, Marqeta, Klarna, these are great examples of the power of fintech that can just move faster, invest more, have a better user experience than a traditional incumbent. Of course, a lot of these will fail due to COVID, just tough economic times. If we look at the amount of fintech funding that's gone into new startups on a year-on-year comparison, we can see on the right-hand side, Europe, the funding amounts that power these are down 35%. So many will fail, but there will be a few powerful ones that, unfortunately for many incumbents, just have higher investment levels, very high skill levels, great user experiences, fully digital, don't have to deal with any of the legacy stuff that incumbents have to deal with, and they will be an impact. It's already starting to show in the Czech Republic. Stripe entered in May. Adyen is the PSP for Elza. Marqeta processes for Twisto. So these types of players will have a bigger and bigger impact. So I think banks and other incumbents won't be able to rely so much on just the current market position, but will need to think about how to defend or cooperate with these new types of players. Another trend we see in other markets, particularly in North America, is how payments are becoming integrated with other types of software. This is especially apparent in the B2B world when we look at business software, but impacts consumer as well. In the banking world, it tends to be very kind of product silo based, and this is payments, and this is cards, and this is operations. Software companies just don't think about it that way. So if you look at examples like Shopify or Clover or Square, these do use payments, and payments is still really the core of what they do, but they become very adept at layering in other services, often much higher margin than payments. So it's a huge revenue opportunity. This doesn't really appear in the Czech Republic yet, but definitely Czech players should think about this stuff. Interesting in the Czech market, there tend to be homegrown accounting, software companies, homegrown applications. Payments, I would argue, do need to be integrated into those further. It's a great user experience. If you're a bank and you have a small business and you can offer them a great bundle of banking, payments, acceptance, all loaded into their accounting software, that's a very powerful proposition, because I know from personal experience, I'm the CIO for our company, it's a pain to buy all this stuff and piece it all together. So if someone comes along and Shopify says, we can give you acceptance, e-com shop, we integrate into your accounting, And yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but isn't it easy? You'd be surprised at the uptake that you can get. So payments integration, we think, is a key trend. Another is B2B payments. B2B is usually the last on anyone's list because it's just complicated. But of course, because it's complicated, this is where a lot of the new fintechs and a lot of innovations have focused. There's definitely now some very mature segments, even among Czech players. You know, Eurowag, I think there's Fido, there's Roger in the Czech Republic, so great companies, but there's a huge world of opportunities out there, and it's more than just employee benefits or fuel cards or T&E. There's a lot of great stuff going on with automation, cross-border, ways to utilize open banking, ways to make the whole procurement and payment process much easier for business-to-business companies, because now in most cases it's just bad. You know, so if I have to pay a supplier in Europe, it's okay. If I'm paying a supplier from our US business, it's a wire transfer. It takes 2 or 3 days. It's incredibly expensive. It's slow. It's not really trackable. And some of the fintechs and more innovative players have made it really easy for B2Bs to transact cross-border and online. And that's a huge revenue opportunity that I think many of the incumbents tend to miss just because it's complicated. If we switch back to the physical world and look at the POS, Miroslav mentioned, sort of the all-in-one system and how that's converging. I mean, that is definitely the case. So if we look at 10 years ago, you would have maybe an MPOS, you'd have a portable terminal, you'd have a desktop terminal, you maybe have some specialized integrated hardware. If you were more advanced, you might have some PC software, and that would be hooked up to pin pads and such. What we're seeing now is really what we call next-gen POS. So even relatively small, cheap MPOS terminals are based on Android. They can be on the phone. Soft POS is coming up. Apple bought MobiWave. So there's just a ton of innovation going on in the physical POS, even though now physical POS is certainly less popular at the moment due to COVID. There's a ton of innovation here because merchants don't care so much about a particular box that accepts cards. But what they do care about is that that box integrates into their accounting software, into their ERP system, and makes their life easier. So we can see that some of the more advanced acquirers in other markets, like First Data, invested a lot into their Clover Smart POS system, took several years to take off and gain traction, but now is quite big. Czech acquirers haven't really focused on this. You do see a little bit of it. O2 eKasa, you see a bit, but there's a ton of opportunity here because it makes the experience much easier for merchants, and they're definitely willing to pay a premium for this type of value-added service because it just makes their lives, makes running their business much easier. So that's something I definitely encourage all the acquirers to take a look at, is how can you integrate your payment and your acceptance offering into other types of software, and especially what the merchant's using at their end POS. If we switch to issuing, always a tough market. When I was at a bank, certainly a huge focus on this because everyone knows that it used to make a lot of money in the past, credit cards, very high return on equity, great return on assets, but it's, many banks just find it relatively challenging. I think one thing to step back and look at that is it's still a great market. If we look at Czech Republic, how consumers use debt, it's still relatively low penetration to other Western European countries. If we look at abroad and how do specialized issuers make money off of credit cards, well, A, they make a lot. So the ROAs, or return on assets, quite high, and it's growing. So, specialized issuers like NewDay in the UK, Advanzia in Germany, notoriously tough credit card market, can grow revenue year on year 20% or more. How do they do this? Specialization and focus. It's often not like rocket science elements, but they just get very focused and they're willing to invest to do promotions, do digital acquisitions. So there's still a lot of opportunity in the core credit card market, still room to grow. And even if you don't have a big budget to do digitalization and lots of fancy things, there's even still a lot of tactical things that we find with our clients that you can do. So this is kind of a Chinese menu of different things that we've seen work in the Czech Republic and other markets. There's always something. I think one thing I've observed is it can be difficult to get the political backing and the budget and the board support to do these types of things, but particularly with cards, which tend to be complicated, there is always something you can do. It could be reskinning the product proposition, focusing on a new segment. Everyone knows that small business is quite hot. You can cross-sell more to mortgage customers. You can tweak the product. There's a lot of tactical things that issuers can do. A lot of times they just lack the will. A credit card portfolio, it's been a problem for 10 years. It's definitely shrinking. It's not getting any better. but I think that doesn't mean we should give up. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of opportunities that can be leveraged. I think one thing that banks tend to think about cards and payments in silos. Cards tends to have a very operational focus, very compliance focus, because it's complex and there's all kind of mandates and it's just a pain. But we find that there's a ton of opportunity in the market for those types of players that think a bit bigger. If you step back and look at some of the fintechs and how they grow customer acquisitions, many of the fintechs are kind of more or less a glorified prepaid card or a glorified debit card. The core functionality isn't significantly better than what any bank in the Czech Republic has. Sometimes, frankly, it's even worse. But what they are good at is bundling a product proposition to make it sexy. You go online and you look at a typical bank webpage and how they advertise payments. They may not advertise payments at all. If they do, it shows a card and it's kind of okay. If you go on a fintech, it's very nicely packaged. It can be the same thing, but they've got 3 key selling points as to why this is interesting, why this is attractive for the customer. It's the exact same product, just with different bundling and different marketing. And they're really good at this because it creates a call to the action for the customer that payments is something they need and they use every day, and sure, they want it to work, but there's a lot more things that they can do with it. So on this slide, we're showing basic areas like sales and marketing, processing, surfacing, the customer experience. There's just a lot of things that you can do to make payments interesting. And you need to look at it, if you're a bank or an acquirer or a traditional player, as more than just your little silo. So you may have responsibility for cards operations, but a bank wants new customers, and payments are a great way to get new customers because it's the only thing that you physically have in your wallet or in your phone. You use it every day. And I've seen talking to a lot of people in other markets, how many people will use Curve or Revolut or one of those because it looks great. But that doesn't mean that an incumbent can't do that too. In fact, oftentimes they can do it better because they've got an existing customer base. They've got additional products that they can tie in. They have a full range of experience, and if you have a problem, you can talk to a person. So I think one thing we always encourage our clients to do is look at the bigger picture. We're not just trying to solve 3D secure implementation and ePIN or something, but what we are trying to solve is how do we bring new customers into the bank, and a lot of that is just basic kind of proposition and marketing and leveraging the tools you have. So I think what we always try to do with our clients is create a compelling vision for growth. Who do you want to be? How do you want to get there? And what do you want to be when you grow up, so to speak? There's always unique factors in the market that you have to look at. In your own organization, there's always problems. But I think one thing we've learned, I've been doing this 20 years, is there is always a way. And right now it might be tough. There's COVID, budgets are cut, it's not a great economic environment. But when in our work, we step outside the Czech Republic and we work with private equity clients, PSPs, fintechs, and other markets, there's a massive amount of opportunity going on. And frankly, much more than I would have thought when I started this 6 months ago. So I think I would just encourage everyone, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the Czech Republic, but always it takes a few minutes, 5 minutes each day, read some of the industry newsletters, see what's going on elsewhere in the industry, get some inspiration, because especially Czech incumbents have a lot of great capabilities. Development costs are lower, much more digitized than some of the Western European companies. Great people, great capabilities, but they need to present a really compelling vision for the broad organization about how to use payments for growth. And this is something that can be done. So I think if there's one thing I'd like to leave you with today, it's optimism. Now it seems bad. COVID, November, it's gray, not great weather. But with payments, we're in a really exciting industry. If I look back at where we are now compared to where it was 10 years ago, it's so much easier to do stuff. Anything you want to do, you effectively can. The development costs are lower. It's easier to integrate. So there's a lot of opportunities for innovation. Czech Republic is unique because it's not Poland. It's not first on the list for new entrants and fintechs. So Czechs, I think, have a unique window of opportunity to do their own innovation, capture their own market before some of the foreign players finally turn around, get their act together, and enter. So there's still, I think, a lot everyone can do, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. And thank you to SPK, Eva, Roman, for the opportunity to speak to you. Have great, happy holidays and a wonderful new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumar.